Hey everybody, how you doing? It's me again, Truth Teacher, coming at you with another video regarding aspects of African history. And it's been a while. The last video I made was 3 years ago now. So I'm long overdue. So I'm just gonna get right into it. Recently I've been watching a lot of videos on YouTube, and I've been seeing, like in the comment section, a lot of African Americans who are down with this revisionist history, this revisionist view of history and what our real origins are. And you already know, I already did one video, the last one that I did 3 years ago, regarding this whole issue about our origins, dealing with these people who claim that our true ancestral heritage is Egypt and we didn't come from West Africa, we migrated there. I dealt with all of that in that video, and especially in the comment section. But I noticed that there's other people out there too. You have these groups, the Hebrew Israelites, who have this doctrine that we're not really African, we originally come from Israel. Then you have this other group that I've noticed, I want to say within the past 5 years, they've come on my radar. These people who are putting forward this narrative that our origins are not in Africa, that we have absolutely nothing to do with Africa in any way, shape, or form, because we're really the true indigenous people of the Americas. And, before I go any further, I want to make this absolutely clear, because I know I'm going to get the anti-blackness trolls coming after me with all your nonsense. This is not the place for you, but I will say this. Understand that these people in no way, shape, or form do they represent, nor do they speak for the Afro-American community, the Afro-Caribbean community, or the Afro-Latino community. They in no way, shape, or form speak for anyone in the diaspora except themselves. So moving on now, for a long time I've been wondering what's going on with these people. Like, where are they getting these weird ideas from, and why would they even want to entertain such notions? And I watched a video this morning by one of my favorite YouTubers. His name is Home Team History. He's got a really great channel. You should check it out if you want factual information about aspects of African histories. And he tackled this issue head on. And he said something that, struck a chord with me. He said that you have a lot of people, unfortunately, in this country who feel some kind of way because they have this belief that Africans sold their own people into slavery. And this is something that I've been confronted with also from various people, white nationalists and white supremacists, saying that, in other words, they're trying to excuse slavery, like, what happened wasn't so bad because, after all, Africans had slavery and Africans were the ones that sold their own people into slavery. So we have to take a look at this question. Is it true? Did Africans indeed sell their own people into slavery? Well, before we answer that question, there's one thing that I would like everybody to consider. Actually, a few things. But the first thing, before we even advance, is our perspective on history, and in particular, our ancestors as people in the African diaspora, descendants of people who came over from Africa during the time of the slave trade. You know, we tend to look at history from a perspective that was created in the 20th century coming into the 21st century. And that is a perspective of Pan-Africanism. Now, we need to understand that this is something that is unique and very, very recent. This didn't exist prior to the experience of European colonialism. Pan-Africanism is a response to the experience of European colonization in Africa and in the Western Hemisphere. This did not exist before that time. And really, when we're talking about the period of European colonization, we're really talking about a period of less than 100 years for most of the continent. You know, it was only until the 19th century that European technology was able to advance to the point where they had military weapons that made it possible for them to subdue African populations in combat. Right? So, very short period of time, and they weren't able to hold on to those colonies for very long either. But we have to take that into consideration, and we also have to realize that Africa is not a country. It never was, and it is not today. Africa is a continent that is made up of many different kingdoms. Well, back then, before the colonial period, it was made up of many different kingdoms, many different states, many different empires. These people were not all the same. They did not view each other as the same. They didn't speak the same languages. They didn't have the same cultures. They were different. Just because of the fact that they were dark-skinned, that didn't mean anything. Nobody had a concept of race back in Africa. Nobody had a concept of blackness in Africa. These are ideas that were imposed or introduced by outsiders. Nobody thought this way. Let me give you something as an example. Let's just think about this, okay? Was there ever a time in Europe when everybody was all united, sitting around a campfire, holding hands and singing Kumbaya because they were white? Did that ever happen? That Europe was united under this one concept of white brotherhood. Did that ever exist? I don't know what history books you people are reading, but the history books that I read, I've seen that these people have been trying to wipe each other off the map since God made dirt. What do you think all those castles are doing all over Europe? Who do you think they were fighting against? They were fighting against each other. Why? Because they did not view each other as the same people. They belonged to their countries, their kingdoms, their regions, and even within their countries, a lot of times there were divisions between people depending on what region in the country they lived in. So, for example, let's look at this, right? Anybody who travels to Europe or to France, let's use France as an example. You know that the people in France have a reputation for really looking down their noses at people who come from the other provinces of France outside of Paris. They even make fun of the way they speak French. That's how real it is. Look at Italy, for example. Italy was never one united nation. That only happened in the 19th century, the latter part of the 19th century. Before that, it was a bunch of different kingdoms and they were always going at war with each other. And even to this day, even though Italy is united as one nation, there's still any Italian, ask any Italian, and they will tell you there's tension between northern Italians and southern Italians. People living up in Florence really cannot stand Sicilians or people from Naples. There's a really big divide between North and South. Just look at our own present day situation now. Look at the European Union. Look at what England is doing. Do they want to be a part of the European Union? Hell no. That's why Brexit is a thing. Look at World War I and World War II. Where was the White Brotherhood then? Weren't the British trying to kill the Germans? Weren't the Germans trying to wipe everybody else off the map that wasn't going along with their program? So why is it that we would expect Africa to be different than any other place on the face of the earth? Aren't Africans human beings like everybody else? I would assume so, right? So if Africans are human beings like everybody else, why are we expecting them to act differently? So the thing that we need to correct before we can even broach this question is we have to stop romanticizing Africa. Okay? Our ancestors in Africa were not celestial beings. Okay? They didn't eat rainbows and shit jelly beans. They were real people, for good and for bad, just like any other human being on the face of the earth. And just like every other continent. Peoples in different regions, peoples of different ethnic groups went to war with people of other ethnic groups. They did not view each other as the same. The Japanese did not view the Chinese the same as they were. They sure as hell did not consider the Filipinos the same as they were. Even to this day, there's tension between Koreans and Japanese. So, why would we expect things to be different in Africa? It was not a country, it was a continent made up of different kingdoms and different empires. And just like everywhere else in the world, those people went to war against their enemies who they did not consider to be their people. So no, Europeans did not roll up into Africa and run out with shopping carts full of Africans, and Africans did not sell their own people. You had different ethnic groups, different kingdoms who went to war with their enemies. And in the process of war, they sold the captives to the Europeans who were on the coast. Now, looking back from our perspective, we can say that's fucked up. Why didn't they all get together against the Europeans? Well, the fact of the matter is, at that period of time, the Europeans were not an immediate threat to them because they didn't have the military wherewithal to conquer the people that they were doing business with. That's just a fact. They tried, the Portuguese tried early in the 1400s, on their quest for exploration, and they got their asses handed to them. So they could not go in there and subdue these people themselves. People were having wars. And as a result of wars, you have captives of wars. And they got sold. Now, we can look and say, yeah, that was really fucked up, man, but, why did they have to resort to that? Well, listen. Every society goes through what we call a dark ages. If we look at the history of Europe as a whole, going back in antiquity, let's start with ancient Greece. Ancient Greece went through its period of the Dark Ages, when their civilization collapsed and they forgot how to write, they forgot all of their technology, etc., etc. And then they had a resurgence. They had, a revival of their culture. Looking further down in history, closer to our time, we know that after the fall of the Roman Empire, all those areas that had been a part of the Roman Empire in Europe, they went through a dark ages. So, just like everywhere else on the planet Earth, the African continent, or large areas of the African continent, went through a period of their dark ages. And it was because of that political and economic instability that kingdoms resorted to waging war against other kingdoms in order to make money. And really, when you really think about it, it wasn't the average citizen of any of these places that was making money. It was the elite class. Let's just look at our society today. Does the elite class of our United States of America give a damn about any of us? Really? Hell no. Has the elite class anywhere in the world given a damn about the average people? Hell no. But if you want to talk about people doing things to their own people, well, let's look at our own present day situation. What's going on in Syria? The Syrian government is committing genocide against their own citizens because they want to get the political rulers out of power, Assad. And rather than him stepping down, he would much rather kill those people than to hand over power to somebody else. And now you've got Syrians who are scattered all over the world, all over Europe. It's a crisis, trying to get away to save their lives. Let me ask you a question. Do you think it's okay that Syrians should feel ashamed of themselves and where they come from just because their own government, their own people, forced them out of their country? Now, I guarantee y'all can see the logic. Like, hell no, why the hell should they be ashamed of where they come from? It's not their fault. It's not their fault that they've got a crazy psychotic dictator that would much rather kill his own people just so he could stay in power. That's not their fault. Why the hell should they be ashamed? Well, by that same token, why the hell should we, as descendants of people from Africa who were enslaved, feel ashamed of where we came from, where our ancestors came from, just because there were wars and civil wars and all kinds of instability going on at that time. Same thing. So instead of having this romantic idea in our heads that Africa was some perfect place, we need to look at reality as it actually is. For better and for worse. We look to our ancestors for inspiration and for strength to show us how to live our lives today. What are the adversities that they faced and how did they overcome them? What are the things that they were able to achieve and how do we use that to inspire ourselves to be the best versions of ourselves and to find greatness and to make great contributions to the society that we live in today? But also at the same time, we also need to acknowledge and look at the mistakes that our ancestors made for the same reasons, so that we do not fall victim to the mistakes that they made, or that we don't, reproduce the same processes in our own lives. That's what the strength of history is there for. That's what the importance of history is for. To inspire us to greatness in our lives, but also to warn us lest we make the mistakes that have taken down great men and women before us. We learn from their mistakes. They went through it, so we don't have to go through it now. So rather than going around feeling sorry for ourselves, feeling ashamed for ourselves, realize something. Regardless of whatever difficulties we may be facing at the present moment, overall, we are survivors. We went through some of the worst things that human beings could ever face, and we are still here. That is a source of strength. Do not take it lightly. That's your power. Look to where you are right now. If you want to find your greatness, you don't have to look anywhere else but in your own goddamn mirror. Greatness is standing where your 2 feet are planted right now. It's inside of you. All you have to do is acknowledge it and work towards it and cultivate it. So, for this question, did Africans sell their own people into slavery? No, they didn't. They sold other people into slavery. People that they did not consider to be their people, but the lesson to be learned from this: do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Because what goes around eventually comes around. And I can sit here and say this because I am a descendant both of slave traders and enslaved. My paternal grandfather, my paternal line, comes out of Central Africa from a man who was the leader of a group of people who waged war against his neighbors for the sake of enslaving them. And my paternal ancestor was kidnapped by the opposition, and he was sold into slavery out of revenge. And that's how he ended up in Jamaica. But his son, that son that was sold into slavery, he learned the lesson from his father's mistake. And even though he was a slave, he went around to all the other plantations where he could get to. And he preached against slavery. Even though he was a slave, he was an abolitionist. And he fought against slavery. So let's take the time to acknowledge our ancestors, acknowledge that they were just human beings like anybody else, for the best and for the worst. We have ancestors who were really great people, and we have ancestors who were really horrible people, just like everybody else on the face of the earth. We have absolutely nothing to be ashamed of in the face of anybody who might try to criticize us or take us down. You show me one nation, one area on the face of this earth that hasn't at some time or another perpetrated atrocities, either against their neighbors or even against their very own people. Show me even one. You can't. Nobody can. So with that being said, how can you come and look at me as a person of African descent and try to criticize my ancestors? Absolutely impossible. So with that, everybody, I hope that helps you to have a better perspective on this issue. If you want to discuss it further, you know what to do down in the comment section. Keep it polite. I don't want to hear anybody trashing anybody else's cultures. This ain't the place for that. Okay? If you have another issue, you want me to make another video going into another aspect of this, just let me know in the comment section down below, and I'll see what I can do. Alright? Everybody, take it easy. Peace.